Okay, so we're recording. Welcome to our next inject of the Command to Commerce podcast. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, just a reminder of what this is all about. It's designed to showcase the careers of professionals out in business and the wider sectors who've had a successful military career before transitioning out into the real world. And what we're doing is sort of shedding light on people who've done that successfully and are now thriving outside. To really give an insight to those of you watching and listening into what that journey feels like and looks like and how it can be done successfully. So for those who haven't met me before, I'm Shell, I'm the Leadership Alchemist. So I've a 20-year military career behind me, and I'm now out in the business sector, working also across government with a focus on serious gaming and decision making. And I also build sort of change makers in fast moving organizations, which most are now. So yeah, that's kind of the focus of my work. So I brought my military career into the sort of private sector and doing really fun stuff. So I'm delighted to be joined by Sophie tonight, Sophie Wadsworth, who will introduce herself. I should declare a bit of previous knowledge of Sophie. We worked together in the military, in the army in sort of 2016, 2018. I'm really looking forward to hearing more about, Sophie, what you've been up to since we worked together. Maybe we'll reflect a bit on that time as well, because it's quite an interesting time for us all. But yeah, so we'll be going through a few sort of questions. But before we do, just to sort of say on behalf of us both that the opinions we're expressing here tonight are our own. They don't represent any sort of company or organisation, so it's just our own thoughts on the subjects for today. So, Sophie, welcome. It's great to see you, and I've been keeping a close eye on what you've been doing since we were in the military together. But perhaps you'd like to just introduce yourself and just what you're doing now to start.
Yeah, amazing. Well, thank you so much for having me. This podcast is such a great idea. I know I reflect on kind of my transition out of the military, and so I think the more voices we can hear, the better. And I'm really honoured to be here. So, Sophie Wadsworth, I work in the strategy team at BNY within the payments business. So essentially what that means in layman's terms, looking at where industries are headed, a lot of that in finance at the moment is around topics like digital assets, AI, and how tech is changing the way money moves. So I have become a bit of a payments nerd since I left the military, but it is one of those industries that the deeper you go, the more interesting it becomes. And so I've spent 4.5 years in financial services. And before that, Shell, like you said, I spent just under 8 years in the military, predominantly in the Royal Engineers. Started out in bomb disposal, and then did a few years in psychological warfare at 77 Brigade, which is where we worked together. And then deployed to Afghanistan, British Overseas Territories, and had some great experiences throughout. But I think one of the great things, I know we'll touch on this, but many of the lessons that I learned in the military, I rely on today at BNY. So I'm looking forward to discussing those a bit more.
Yeah, brilliant. And it's kind of full circle. It's so good to hear. I mean, you've had a really punchy career. And I think for some people watching, they're probably looking at us and thinking, goodness, these two women have had quite interesting lives and careers. And I think it's good to shed light on that. I actually didn't realise that you started in bomb disposal. So yeah, okay, amazing. So I guess just reflecting on the year that's been, or the year so far, what's your review of the year so far, Sophie? What are you up to, and how are things going?
Well, I guess, my year so far, 2026 has been, I guess it's just been continued uncertainty. And I guess both in, the world, but also in my personal life as well. So I guess I'll break that question down into two halves.
Yeah.
So first, how do I see the world and the review from a macro stance, I guess. Like, I think firstly, especially in financial services, 2026, it's just that persistent uncertainty. We've got like geopolitical landscape, we've got major technology drives, especially around AI and digital assets, which is really exciting. But I think for our clients, and BNY and the rest of financial services, it's just this shift from maybe 5 to 10 years ago, when things were a bit more stable, everything was a bit more slow paced. We've had so much change, and it's persisting, and I think that's really changed people's attitudes. And personally, so I feel like 4.5 years into my civilian career, I've really started to settle in. So as every good veteran, we have to shake it up. I've moved house. We're starting a renovation. We're going to have a baby in September. So we've got a lot going on.
Chaos.
But embracing the change, which I think is exciting.
That's amazing, and congratulations. That's such good news. And just to situate, when did you leave? So I left in 2021. Did you leave the same year?
So end of 2021 was when I left. Yeah.
Yeah, so we left in the same year, and it's kind of been a constant barrage of sort of geopolitical and UK based challenges since then, hasn't it? And political challenges. So we both went out into a business landscape that was really quite evolving. And I guess that kind of I'm really intrigued as to how that works in your sector. Certainly in my sector, it was kind of wall to wall opportunities, but also just I found when you come out, just because you could do lots of things doesn't mean you necessarily should. And there's a lot of kind of good advice, but I sometimes think it's good to listen to yourself a little bit and decide where you can add most value. Okay, great. Wow, congratulations on everything that's happening. And I know you've moved recently as well, so you look extremely organized for everything that's happening in your life. So yeah, maybe you can share some tips on how to do that better. Okay, great. So maybe just exploring the sort of threat and risk landscape for a while, because we both work in quite a high risk environment. So, a lot of the stuff I do is working with organizations, whether it's government or private sector organizations, who are managing large quantities of whether it's financial risk, corporate sort of reputational risk. What sort of skill sets and sort of experiences in the military do you think you bring to what you provide for clients in that space now?
It's so interesting. I think, and you'll have had this as well. I think immediately when I left the military, you can't really relate your skills and experience to what people are talking about in business. But the more and more I've had discussions, clients, across financial services, but also peers. As soon as you kind of do the translation between military and civilian, you realize there's so much to translate there. So I guess risks. You mentioned the geopolitical risks, and especially, and you said, when we left the military, it was such a pivotal change. I think, very soon after I left was the start of the war in Ukraine, and that shifted so much. And coming from a military background, you think about the instability, the military requirements, and all of that background. But what I've learned out of financial services is the broader impact to that, which has been so interesting, and it's really rounded out how I view the world, especially working for global banks. I've worked for predominantly US headquartered banks, which have global footprint, which gives you a incredibly different view, especially coming from the British military, where we're always looking at it from the UK standpoint and the Brits. So for me, it's been really intriguing to see how military conflict, from Ukraine, and then today we've got a lot of tension still in the Middle East, and also a lot of tensions still coming from COVID and the outcome of that. So I think for financial services, it's really understanding how conflict, military conflict may be time bound, but the impacts last for decades, and absolutely decades. And so from my perspective, it's, how has it shifted trade corridors? The Strait of Hormuz, is a key one that has, overnight shifted trade corridors completely. So I think how geopolitical risk is impacting trade, interest rates, and how businesses are having to use forecasting a little bit better, so that they can actually start planning out and not relying on the stability that we had 10 years ago. And that relates a lot to the military, because you have to plan, you have to look at the risk, but through a long-term lens. And so I think actually increasingly military skills are more relevant today. And you mentioned business risk and resilience. I think a lot more focuses on that today.
I feel like resilience is the big buzzword for 2026, because like you say, that resonates with me, because I remember leaving, and within 6 months I was kind of like, oh, did I leave at the right time, or did I actually leave at the point where what we were doing in our careers, it came into really sharp focus with Ukraine. I don't think anyone would have necessarily predicted that the war in Ukraine would go on for as long as it has. And so, like you say, the shockwaves throughout sort of the international community, both financially and politically, are still being felt daily. But I think in business context, what you've said really resonates as well. So I work with a lot of sovereign, whether it's sovereign companies, technology companies, or indeed sovereign kind of capabilities in government. And what intrigues me most is when you and I were in the military, it was very much backing UK first, like everything was UK branded and flag marked. Now we're approaching the market much more as a European opportunity. So kind of trade corridors opening in through Norway and Denmark, and it's a much more exciting landscape in Europe, I think, in both of our worlds. The Middle East stuff, again, very interesting. So my I suppose I'd note from the world I operate in, a sort of a galvanizing of the GCC, and actually trade corridors being much more blended across the Middle East, and actually as someone who's looking to trade into the Middle East, actually understanding the nuance culturally, and their financial kind of cultures and business culture, I think is quite nuanced. And so offering something that's genuine value add, and a unique proposition to the Middle Eastern market is kind of where it's at. So yeah, it's fascinating time, isn't it? So if I kind of dwell on this for a bit more in terms of the skill sets, because you've had a really mixed portfolio in your military career. If I was to sort of say, could you articulate just one skill that you built in the military that you feel has been really game changing for you out here? I know there are loads, but which one would it be?
I think for me, I'm going to say turning a plan into execution. And so what I mean by that is I'm obviously in a strategy role. So, day to day, I would say for the ex-military and currently serving, it's a blend of G3 and G5. I look at the long-term picture, I create the plan, and then I also take some of it to execution and hand over to the lines of business for delivery. And so one undervalued skill of the military is being able to think through from a blank bit of paper where you start writing your plan all the way down to execution, resourcing, what goes wrong, risk evaluation, and then also, what happens next after execution, and what are you trying to achieve? How do you measure it? All of that. It's undervalued because very rarely do people in corporate careers actually have the variety of careers that military people do, because you and I, we had experiences within our regimental duty, but also outside of it. and you worked in plans, but also execution, but also a little bit of the intelligence side. And having that bigger picture and being able to see what happens in each of these different areas, and then being able to take a step back, do the plan with the execution in mind, and then having the communication skills to hand it over and influence people to buy into your plan. That has been the number one, I guess, skill that I have leveraged and has kind of set me apart from, or I guess has allowed me to achieve things that other people who've just had a civilian career haven't been able to get that experience for.
Yeah, 100%. And it stands out, I think, in that sort of that sweet spot, strategy to execution, and that kind of cliff that you can fall off between a large transformation program, for example, and actually getting the thing done. And I would say I'd kind of build on what you'd said. So I think, you spoke about one very technical skill, which is, how to actually execute, but first of all, have the detail in a plan and deliver the detail to a plan, to then actually go into the practice and discipline of execution. But then a human skill of kind of influencing and bringing people with you. And I think being bold in that as well, and being decisive in your engagements and negotiations with people and groups. I've led big sort of strategy programs where you've got large multinational, thousands of people trying to align them on one vision. Sometimes just generating some momentum can actually get a lot more done, and you have to listen to people and soak up the kind of response to the action. But I think we're naturally quite attuned to that. The other thing I would say is horizon scanning. So in this world we're in, where there's so much coming over the hill, and actually the predictability of what's coming next in terms of business risk or opportunity, it's actually really difficult to put your finger on what might happen next. I think the ability to horizon scan and have a constant, if you like, watching brief on what could happen next, and also pulling in on open source information and intelligence. So reading widely, being interested in what's happening in global politics. I mean, I'm a massive newscast geek. I'll put a headset on when I'm running, and I'm always fascinated about what's happening in that wider context. Why? Because partly it's in our DNA, but partly it's the more you understand about the broader kind of, if you like, sky, ground and underground of the world, strategy, operations and culture, the more likely you are to be able to predict what might happen next, and therefore prepare for it. So I baked into one of the cool things I've done since I left was I built a strategy game that focuses very much on what could happen. And the strapline for the strategic orbits exercise is see the unseen. So it's actually building the cognitive sort of skills and quotient to actually think through to the finish, and to articulate and identify where soft signs are changing the picture. I think that's quite important for boards and C-suites now.
I think it's very important. And I would actually love to hear your thoughts, because I think one of, going back to risks in businesses, I think one of the risks, obviously, and I'm going to talk about AI, obviously it is a massive opportunity, but one of the risks that I see is that businesses are overusing AI to guide their strategy, and it's missing out on, all of the pieces that you just said. And I would love to hear, how you're seeing that playing out.
Yeah, I'm glad you addressed that, because I think AI is the great opportunity, but also the great risk of strategy. Because my view is, if you don't build the cognitive ability to master AI, actually you're losing a lot in terms of not just your strategy, but your ability to respond in the moment. So one of the reasons we built this process, and we do a lot of serious gaming for business and large businesses, international businesses and government, is because there's a recognition in fast moving businesses that they need to continue to build that sort of decisiveness, but also actually just the cognitive load. You and I have been in operational environments where the lives depend on the decisions we make. Imagine a world where AI is not confirming those decisions, but making them on our behalf. I think the worlds we've come from, we recognise the importance of building the human intelligence alongside the technical intelligence. So that's really critical to everything I do. I guess practically we build AI into the back end of everything we do in terms of the data analytics side. So we do a lot of we use AI to make that more seamless, but we use it as a thought partner, not as a decision maker. And then at the front end, that's where the fun bit is, because humanoids are really fun to interact with when you're on a live exercise. So we use it judiciously and ethically, and that's, you're always on the knife edge in a business with that. So we have an AI ethics sort of model for what we do, and you've got to just keep your eye on the ball with that, because the landscape's changing every few hours. I think I worry about us sleepwalking into a world where LLMs feel so comfortable that we actually forget the art of decision making completely. And technically, without being too boring and geeky about this, there's a difference between modeling and decision making. So use modeling data to then get a human in, or at least on the loop. Whereas if you use sort of live data to make decisions, that's where the risk lies. And I think that's the same in any landscape, not just in gaming. I think in any high risk environment, there has to be a human on the loop. But yeah, fascinating area. And I'm really fascinated about how that's changing the landscape in banking and finance, because the efficiencies are so apparent. I've got a good friend who works in a tech company, and they're in real estate, and their technology platform is basically using AI to identify the most, if you like, cost efficient ways to build and scale large infrastructure projects. Brilliant application. Lots of challenges from an assurance perspective. So so maybe I can indulge that a bit. How do you see it changing the landscape in your world?
Oh my gosh, such an exciting topic. I guess I'll break it down to a couple of areas. So, and I'll focus in on the payments landscape. So obviously the financial industry is huge. Payments is the bit that I specialize in. So what I mean by payments is how do you move money from A to B? So for you and I, it's how do you go to a shop and pay? Is that Apple Pay? Is it your card? And how do you pay online? And how does that money actually physically move? So within the payments landscape, there's so many opportunities from the very technical side of how do payments actually move. There's a lot of friction today. Especially for businesses who are operating cross-border. So payments can be slow, payments can be cancelled, and there's a lot of steps that need to be taken. So how we can use AI is actually just to speed that up by automating some of the I guess bits where humans are involved to actually manually process stuff. You can just use AI to do that automatically. So that's great. And then looking a little bit more, and this touches on the point you made, or the discussion we were having about risk. If you are a global organization or a business and you've got cash in Europe, Asia, and the US, and you've got different businesses with different kind of supply chains, it's all moving around at different parts. It's actually really difficult to know, when do you need money in the US? And with today's payment environment, you have to wait for the bank's opening hours and things like that. So it's actually, for businesses, really difficult to have money in the right place at the right time. And that's why businesses end up having large overdraft fees, things like that. So what AI can do is it can help with that data modeling. So you can say, okay, this is my business, this is what we've done for the last year. AI can actually help predict where you're going to need cash. And it can also help in that decision making. So it can say, we think AI thinks that you are going to need a large amount of cash in May because that's when all your bills come out in the US. It can make that recommendation, and then obviously you can put in frameworks to say we want a human decision maker in there, or you can automate some of the more low important pieces there. So it's a technical piece, but also it's building resiliency through that forecasting and creating more certainty.
And I think that's a great example, because that's fascinating to me. Actually, what you've articulated is the need for human judgment. You need a lean and effective process as well that makes the best of the human AI team at the right points. There are handoffs between AI and, whether it's the sort of agentic element of it and the human being, and the judgment piece, the strategy piece, which is where military people, I think, can add a lot of value, is what's the best model for that, and how do you assure it? How do you test it? What's the fail safe for it? What's the contingency plan if that doesn't work? Where's the backup system? So I think our sort of systems way of thinking, you've articulated that really well here. Okay, well, I'm loving this conversation, Sophie. It's great, and it's so good to hear how much I guess the military skill set translates directly across. So we're coming to sort of the final part now. So I just guess addressing the audience for this. So there'll be people in business, there'll be people who are interested in the military and transition. There might be people who are looking to leave and are looking for some inspo about, how do I make this big leap? What sort of piece of advice might you give to them around the process of transition and, how they can do it well?
Yeah, what a big question. And I think, I know you and I have spoken on this before. It's so much easier to answer this 4.5 years into my career. And I remember getting some very good advice when I was leaving, but until you actually live through it, you realize why people are saying this. So I think the first thing is spend as much time as you can with people in industry who are either veterans or who are a safe space for you, just to and I mentioned it earlier, but translate military to corporate language, because a lot of the concepts are the same, but the way that we talk about them in the two different environments is very different. And so actually just spending time talking about in business language, you'll realize how much transfers, and that will make talking about your skills and experience so much easier, because one of the biggest challenges being able to articulate, I did XYZ in the military and this is why you should hire me. It's so difficult. I mean, firstly the translation, but secondly the confidence, because I think as veterans, or certainly when I left the military, I felt very underconfident about what I could bring to the corporate world. And so, building that confidence, that's one thing. Secondly, I think it takes a while to know what you want to do, and I guess my advice is be patient with yourself. It's very natural for a lot of military people, myself included, to leave the military and say, I want the most punchy job that I can find in the most, high-paced environment. But I think actually when you leave the military, you've got to recognize that you're starting a new career, and it's an opportunity to say, who am I? What do I actually enjoy? What do I want to be? Who do I want to work with? Where do I want to work? And what is important to me? Those questions, I would say, I probably took a year before I actually truly asked myself that. But I would say, as much as you can address them when you're leaving and thinking about leaving, it'll help you network and fine tune where you want to go. It's a journey.
It is a journey, and you did a lot better than me, because I think probably about 4 years in, I started thinking, who am I? So I was sadly, one of the statistics that 20%, they say, go into the wrong role, because you're sort of looking at your next stage of your career in the image of what's gone before. So I guess my first piece of advice, a very basic one, is you don't have to be a project manager, which I think sometimes we're tuned into being project managers because we have project skills, but we also have strategic skills. We also have creative skills. We have influencing skills. So that was the first bit. I think the main one, just building on something you said around identity, was don't be, I think once you've really understood what value you add, to actually tell your story. And I think for us in the ex-military, particularly when we've worked in maybe some quite discrete spaces, that can sometimes be the hardest thing, is how to articulate your storyline in a way that resonates with people out here. And it took me mentors and people who I was working with to really be intrigued about my military life. I really disclosed nothing for the first year. And then, people gradually find out what you've done and start to ask you things. And, my advice would be to tell those stories, work out what you stand for, and be authentic, but actually tell those stories, because there's a lot of value in disclosing. It's really good for building relationships as well. Because I do think for a lot of people out here, what we've done is quite mythical, because the institutions are closed institutions. We are now the exemplars of them, and we have to tell that story in a positive light. I have a huge amount of great kind of memories from the military. It was hard, but it was brilliant. So I think telling your story and not being afraid to really fill that space and embody that space, I think that took me really quite a long time, and I think I'm still learning. So yeah. Okay. Well, I'm conscious I could go on for hours with this. This is great, Sophie, and it's so interesting and fascinating to hear more about the sector. But yeah, just like to say thank you so much for joining us on Command to Commerce, and I hope we can continue the conversation and maybe pull up a sandbag and have some chats as well offline about some of our experiences in the military, which was a really interesting time. But yeah, thank you so much for your time, and for people watching, I hope you've enjoyed tuning in, heard some interesting stories, maybe heard some surprising stories by hearing from Sophie and I, and look forward to the next session on Command to Commerce. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.